This is Viterbi Voices.
Coming to you from the University of Southern California, Viterbi School of Engineering.
We're here to give you the inside scoop about research, classes, student life, and so much more.
All of these shared from our students, faculty, and other members of our USC community.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back into Viterbi Voices. As usual, I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Paul Ledesma, Director of Undergraduate Admission here at the USC Viterbi School of Engineering.
And I am Emily Powis, a senior studying biomedical engineering.
Emily, how's your week going?
It's so good. I actually recently classes have started and a lot of my classes are in person. So I went to my first in-person classes in a year and a half yesterday.
Wow. What was that like?
I didn't think I was going to get so emotional about it. But when I entered my class, it was one of my senior biomedical engineering classes. And I got to see all of my BME friends again. And it was just crazy being in a room. And then they also have a Zoom option, which I didn't know. So some certain students couldn't come in person. So they Zoom into the room. And when they have a question, it comes over on the speakers super loud.
Cool.
And so my teacher thought it was an angel talking to him during lecture.
I totally want to talk to you more about that. We should definitely do that on the back end of this episode. But let's get into what this episode's about. Tell everybody what we did with this particular episode.
Yeah. So in this episode, we talked to Chris and Cameron about the application process and just kind of reflected on how that worked for us. We gave our tips for how we approached it, but kind of in the end, we realized there's no one answer for how all of this is done. And then Paul, you were there, of course, to kind of ground the conversation and kind of have an admissions perspective, which I really valued in that.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it was a really cool conversation because there's oftentimes, everybody's trying to figure out how to do this, what's the best way to do it. And I think that in some ways you all get some unfair questions like, oh, how did you do it? Tell me how you did it. And I think you guys want to be helpful. And I think what's really good about this conversation is we try to approach it from that perspective, unlike you all telling people what you did and how you went through the process. But then also me trying to explain how the process works. And ultimately what I think is that this particular episode is great for anyone looking to apply to the school, because it kind of walks you through the application process through the eyes of someone who's been through it. And then also there's me to kind of help guide and advise on how you might want to approach it. Spoiler alert, there isn't a way to do this. I think that's the one thing I want to say at the top. There's no way to ace this. There's no manual you can buy to say this is how you get admitted or this is how you make a great application. But we do talk about it, that I think that when you're through this episode, you will feel, I know you, what do you think? I think you'll feel more comfortable with going through the application, or you'll feel more ready to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously don't have the perspective of listening to it as a prospective student, but I know when I was reading the Reddits and stuff, it was just stressing me out how people had this formulaic approach. And I think it really helps to know that we all did something different and we all ended up here.
Maybe that's what this is. This is the antidote to all of you reading Reddit and any other message boards online that you're stressing out about the application process. So if you're stressing out about the application process, start here and let us walk you through it a little bit more. Hi guys, Cameron, Chris, good to see you. Well, Chris, we can't see you. I'm sorry you're not hooked up to strong Wi-Fi, but it's good to see you. How are you guys? Summer's been?
It's been pretty good. I was working a job, so definitely get a lot of experience from that, but I'm definitely excited to go back to school.
Very cool. Very cool. Very cool. Where were you working again?
I was working for the civil design firm called Kinley Horn, and I was working in development services. So definitely a big departure from anything I've done in the past. So learned a lot.
Yeah. Awesome, man. And Cameron, I've seen you a few times. We've seen a few little sessions with you, but how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Same vibe as Chris. I worked over the summer intern, so it's definitely good to get that industry experience. But I'm glad to get back to campus and get started with classes.
And you were interning at
Microsoft.
Microsoft. I was like, it's a computer company. I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna get it wrong. Why don't you just guys real quick introduce yourself to our audience in case they don't know who you are. Let them know, who you are, where you're from, what you're studying, what year you are.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I can start. So I'm Chris. I'm going into my senior year studying civil engineering with an emphasis in building science, and I'm from Woodland Hills, California.
And I'm Cameron. I'm going into my junior year studying computer science and business administration, and I'm originally from Chicago.
So I know Emily and you, and Emily's here too. Hi, Emily. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I'm just lurking over here.
I know that offline, we've all been talking about like the admission process, and the application went live. The Common App went live on August 1st. And of course, no one needs to fill it out right now, but they can look at it, and it's due December 1st to be considered for merit-based scholarships. But we were talking about an episode that you guys were really interested in doing about basically the admission process and the application process and your experiences, and maybe questions you guys might have for me, or just questions you're pretty sure that you had when you were going through the process, and really just kind of really have a free flowing discussion as to like, what's this application process about? What are some things that you've heard that you wanted to straighten out? What are some things that students always ask you? So I think that's a great conversation. And I just want to start it off by just giving a couple quick tent poles for the conversation, which is, the Common App is live. It is due to apply to USC in the Viterbi School. You apply via the Common App and the USC Writing Supplement, which is basically the USC part inside the Common application. When you're inside the Common App, you need to make sure that you add USC as one of your list of schools. You can do that right now. I'd recommend you do that. As you go in, you add USC, the University of Southern California, add that to your list of schools, and then you click into the USC Writing Supplement. And the first thing you should do is go to the academic section and make sure that you select one of the Viterbi School of Engineering majors as your first choice major on the application. And you'll know that that's a first choice major. You'll know that it's a Viterbi School of Engineering major because every one of them has kind of an indicator on it. Like the first three letters are V as in Viterbi, VSE. So VSE, and then it shows all the different degree programs there. So we're going to list that down, and then you can see all the different questions that will populate. There's some long form stuff. There's a lot of short answer questions. There's some really quick takes that are in there that are kind of fun. It's a long application. It does take time. It should take you effort, and it should be somewhat of an iterative process in that you're reviewing and revising and getting feedback on these things with friends and family members, et cetera. But the one thing I want to make sure you all know is that it's not due till December 1st. You get it in by December 1st in order to be considered for merit-based scholarships. And there's no reason that anyone should not be applying by December 1st. Of course, there is a January deadline. I usually don't even share it until we get closer to January, because I don't want you to think that you have a deadline in January. I want you to think you have a December 1st deadline. You go ahead and get it in. Some of you always ask, I don't have my fall grades at that point. I'm like, yeah, no one does. Just submit it, and you can get your fall grades in later. The application is not like a closed box that you close off when you hit submit. You can always add information later on, and students are always adding in their fall transcripts later on. So don't worry at all about that. So you apply to engineering as a first choice major, and get it in by December 1st. And that's essentially it. That's the basics of it. But I know you guys had some thoughts, and you guys had some questions that you wanted to go over and discussion, and let's have at it. Where do you want to take it from here?
Kind of preparing for this episode, I was kind of thinking about like what I wrote for my essays and stuff. I think
essays
are definitely the hardest part for me.
Essays are where all like the myths and legends and rumors exist too online. You know, like, is this a good college essay? And there's so many different like websites and message boards about college essays and all that stuff.
So I was kind of wondering, like, what did you guys write your college essays on? Like, I know you guys from like an academic standpoint at USC, but it's weird asking like USC students like what they were like in high school and what made it into their personal statement.
Looking back at it, I wish I would have taken a different approach, but obviously I guess at some point the different approach really didn't matter because I got into USC and I like it. But I'd say that for the personal statement,
well, what'd you do that you regret? You wanted to take a different approach? Like what'd you do?
I guess I guess looking back, I kind of wanted to show a little bit more of my non-engineering side in my personal statement, which for me, I guess engineering was such a big part of like doing robotics and like how I really came to love it as more than like, I really want to do this for my career. And I wrote a lot about that in my personal statement. So I really wrote about just like how I really came to love engineering in my personal statement. And then for the supplements, I really just focused on like doing some research about USC. So like I talked about how I really wanted to join RPL, which I did go to RPL before I switched my major and inherently just left all of mechanical engineering behind. But I talked about how I was interested in finance and I love trading stocks, which is like something I still do. So I just tried to throw in like as much information about as possible. Like if I wanted to know who Cameron Cole was, what could I possibly know? And I just kind of throw all these different things in there. And like when I applied, there was like all of the little, tell us about your favorite TV show and like the favorite book that you've read and your favorite snack. And I was just trying to just be honest. I wanted to know, like, get to know me, like I'm your friend. And I was just cool and honest with it.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I feel like I took my approach to the essays was like the complete opposite. I actually used the Common App to talk about everything outside of engineering. Just I really focused on more of my personal growth and maturity throughout high school and just how I really came into becoming a confident person who could speak up for myself. And I feel like I use the supplementals to more talk about what I really was passionate about and talk about how I wanted to work with urban infrastructure and how that was really one of my goals with choosing civil engineering. So I feel like I took the opposite approach, but it's interesting because it both worked out for both of us, just which shows that like there's not really a correct path or a correct way that you should write the essays. I feel like you always read online that there's like 1,000,001 different ways that you can approach them. And I feel like that's the truth. It's like you really just have to find your best way to tackle them. And the way that feels the most, I guess, personal, or also the one that you're not going to feel like you're faking your way through.
Agree, because I know like I was looking online, like how should I structure a college essay? And there are people who gave all these templates. They're like, oh, here's your outline for what you talk about in the essay. And I tried writing one and it just was so bad. Like it came out really bad. I was like, I can't turn this in here. Like they're like, this is not gonna work out well for me. I mean, maybe for some people it did, but I know for me, trying to follow an outline to try to talk about myself didn't really work out well. And it felt unnatural to me.
Yeah, I always feel like the first couple attempts at it too are a little kind of, you're like, why, that sounds awful. But I feel like we talked about, you need to do several drafts to kind of work up to really what sounds the most natural for you.
Exactly. My English teacher always said the first essay is like the crappy first draft. And it was definitely a crappy first draft. I know for me, I actually asked some of my English teachers to review some of my essays. So like just for USC, but also for other outside scholarships, just anything in general. It's like, hey, can you take a look at these essays? Maybe like, is my structure here? Could I talk about that a little more? And it's great to get an English teacher because they know who you are and how to get really good writing. And I definitely asked them for some help on the essay. So that kind of added it too. But yeah, getting that first draft is not good. And then the revisions from yourself, friends and family, other people. Don't have to take all the advice, but that helped me a lot too.
Yeah, I approached the essays like I didn't talk about anything academic in almost any of my supplements or anything unless it was like very explicitly asked for. So my personal statement was all about how I volunteered like teaching people with disabilities how to rock climb outside. And it was something that I've always been super passionate about. Like I climb like 7 days a week. So it meant a lot to me, but a lot of people told me, don't write about that. Don't write about that. Like everyone writes about volunteering. It's cliche. Don't write about it. Don't write about it. And I like tried to write other things that were more like interesting and like less like cliches, but it was something really important to me. It felt like super ingenuine to like write. Some people write college essays that are like about a time they went into a cafe and had some epiphany about like that they wanted to study medicine or engineering or something. And I just like couldn't spin like something like that up. So I just kind of like followed like what I knew was most important to me. And the one piece of advice I got that I don't know if Paul can back this up, but a lot of people told me like, just, you want to make sure that your essay, if someone were to like drop it on the floor at your high school or something, someone should be able to pick it up and be like, oh, I just read this and this is Emily Powis's essay. That's the only piece of advice I really followed.
That's a really good way of putting it. I've never heard it that way. And I think I'm going to use that from now on. Someone drop this essay, they know that it's yours. I've been listening and biting my tongue on every one of your guys' descriptions. But what I love that I didn't interrupt any of you is that you all canceled each other out. Like Cameron, you started with, oh, I probably should have done this. And then Chris was like, well, yeah, I did completely the opposite. And then it was like, oh, I did completely different. And it's like, and I think that's the point in that looking at this little trifecta of the three of you, just as a really small sample set, what I think what I think we ventured to discover in our conversation there was what's the right way to do it. And what you all just figured out through that collective ping-ponging across your examples is that there isn't a way to do it. And that's probably the most important thing to tell an incoming high school student or someone who's going to be applying. And I hope that everyone can go back, maybe even rewind it and listen to the explanations again from Cameron's perspective, to Chris's perspective, to Emily's perspective, of how they thought they were supposed to do it, or even looking back on it, how they think they should have done it. And the one thread throughout all of that was that they each individually had to come to a kind of had to go through a challenging process to identify what their identity is at that moment. Who are they? What are they thinking? What are they wanting to do? What is their perspective on either academic or non-academic challenges in their life, and what was representing them the most? And I mean, to kind of call out just a quick example is Cameron's reflecting back on what he thought his identity was, but he's doing it from the perspective now that he's changed his major. So he's like, oh, I should have changed things because now I'm different. It's like, no, you just weren't there yet. Chris has like had this solidified construction and urban infrastructure from the get-go. So he had a solidified identity. He knows what he wanted to do. It's what he's doing now. He's ready to go. And Emily had passions that she wanted to make sure that she was expressing because that was important to her. And I think what's valuable in all of this is that you have me on the other end of this, reading all of these. And I often get the question, what's the best essay? What's the best version of the essay? Or more specifically, my favorite question I get almost every day of my life is just, what are you looking for? And I'm not looking for any of these things, but what I am looking for is a sense of authenticity. And I think that the thread here is that you all were given advice that just didn't sound right to you at some level. Like you're like, oh, that's just not me, or that doesn't work for me, or like, oh, I should have done that, should have done this. And that's the point, is that when you trust your gut and you're weaving an authentic story that is reflective of your identity, keeping in mind that your identity, we know, is the identity of a 17-year-old. We know it's not supposed to be locked in, right? You know, Chris has is the outlier here, where he has that sense. And there are some of you in our audience that are totally like that. You have one thing that you want to do and you're set on it, but the majority of you don't. That's totally fine. You know, and the idea of, even in our description, we flipped a couple of times from essay to personal statement to all this stuff. And I think we're caving into these societal pressures of understanding that there's this one document that defines you. and it just isn't. And more specifically, to borrow some of Cameron's description about like, how am I going to present myself? Well, the application has lots of different things. An essay is one of those things. And so the whole application is everything that we want to get out of you. So don't think that it's supposed to like give you every single part of who you are and what you do. And then the application should be that as best we possibly can. The application is somewhat of like a mosaic or a stained glass, where we're bringing all these things together so we can see who you are. If it dropped on the floor, we should definitely know that it's Emily Powell's application. The essay, sure, we want to know that it has your sense of identity and authenticity. But the one thread here that I do want to pick up on as well is well written. Now, we are not English teachers. I am not one to sit back and talk about use of prose and iambic pentameter or whatever you want to get into. I can't remember my English classes back in the day, but I want to understand it, if that makes any sense. So the one bit of advice I tend to give most applicants is, when you have your essay or your written works to a point where you think it's pretty good, see if you can get someone to read it who doesn't know you. And this is to the vein that Emily was talking about. So sometimes it's like a friend of a parent or something like that, or a teacher that you've never really had before, just to give you some open feedback. You don't need it corrected. You're not going for a grade, but it's just a question of, do you understand this? And one kind of big example I give on this is like, if you have a certain sense of humor
Yeah.
that only you and your friends know, and they're just dying laughing at these jokes that are in here, but you give it to someone who doesn't know you and it just comes across as weird and creepy, that it's going to come across as weird and creepy to me. So don't do that. That is a common thread of like, just give it to someone who, just see if it's, it's a communication exercise. I said A, are you getting A? Like on the other end of this, is it coming through clear? Are you getting a sense of who I am and what I want to do and what I'm trying to say? Or is it muddy? And usually sense of humor is always there. And the other thing of advice that I tend to give, and sometimes this comes up is, or when you look on these websites of like how to do it right, you might stumble across this one statement that I hate, which is, oh, you got to stand out. How do you stand out? I often get the question, what's the best one you've ever written, or what really stands out to you in your memory? And I will be very blunt and honest with you all. The only things that stand out to me that are in my memory are very negative. The positive ones don't stand out. The positive ones are like, yeah, cool. I like those. Hey, great, cool, awesome. Moving on, right? Like, that's great. I like this, right? It's good stuff. But no one ever, you don't read an essay and go, oh my gosh, get out the green stamp and hit admit on it. It never happens that way. No decisions are made that way. It's a much more complicated and nuanced process. But the, oh my gosh, get this out of here as quickly as I can, that does happen, right? And that can happen with essays. And there are some weird things that get written into these essays. Probably more common than some are a parent who maybe is a hardcore alum of the university, right? And a hardcore alum of the university puts a lot of pressure on their kid to go to USC, and that kid does not want to come to USC. It's been made clear to me in an application, I do not want to come to USC. My parents are making me apply. They're making me fill this out. And so it's like, okay, well, we don't have to do anything with you. Like we're happy to move this one on. That's pretty simple. I've seen that more than once, in addition to some other horror stories that are just weird stuff.
I definitely feel like, yeah, you're hitting on an important point that I think that we can all relate to, is this idea of trying too hard to make your essay into something that it's not. And I feel like I definitely at points when I was writing my essay, I was like, this is too boring, or this isn't interesting enough. I need to make it more, I guess, entertaining, or more dramatic. But I feel like whenever I would try to do that, it would just come off as just really just over the top and ridiculous, and just, it wouldn't make sense. And I feel like it's like you're saying, it doesn't have to be this insane story of your life. Not everybody's life is super complicated and this like TV show, but it's more just about making it real. And I feel like even if it's something simple, if you're passionate about it, that'll come across to whoever's reading it.
Yeah, and well written. That made me pop up one example that I do remember. I was reading this essay, and it was written. I always sometimes have jokes in my office about like, if I have another essay that starts with onomatopoeia again, that's where you make sounds, right?
Like the
Mine
pop
definitely
thing.
started like that.
Oh my God.
People told me to, I forgot about that. People were like, it needs to be
Oh my
descriptive. They should be able to feel
God.
where you are. And I was like, this feels so
Right.
stupid.
Right. Well, there is something to be said about being well written and descriptive, right? Like that's helpful. But like for some reason, I don't know what percentage, but I feel like it's a lot anecdotally that I get the thwack or the pop or the snap. And then it's usually this snap. There went my NFL career. I'm like, you weren't going to have an NFL career, man. Like you just give it up. Like, or thwack. And then my trumpeting days were over. I don't remember. Like, fine, I get it. It's fine. I get it. I'm not going to automatically be turned off with these things because I know you all are trying to like find your way into the story. Do what you need to do. Anyways, this one story started that way, but it kept going and it really drew me in. I was like, this is really well written. And it was, if I remember correctly, because the prompts change, y'all too. Like the prompts it's not like a personal statement, for lack of a better term, but there's sometimes things you can respond to. And what I want you to do is when you read these prompts, what speaks to you, what sounds cool to you, and what makes you say, oh, I have something that I can tell you about here. But one of the prompts at the time, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically like, tell us the time that you overcame a great challenge and what it meant to you. Something like that, right? I mean, you guys understand where that come from. And this one young man was writing the story, and it was so filled with imagery. Like I could feel it. And he was driving for the first time. and it was a rainy day, and it was, it was windy, and his grandmother of however many years, frail, is sitting in the passenger seat, and she's his first passenger, and they're driving down the road. And like, I'm hopefully I'm giving it justice here, where like the suspense was building. I'm like, oh my God, what happened? And then he came to it up above, this foreboding element where he had to turn on his left turn signal. And he did it. He made the U-turn.
He knows it.
Yeah.
And I stopped reading and I went, wait a minute, I missed something. Started over, read it again. Because obviously you're reading a lot. You're like, did I miss something? Like, what happened? It's like, no. And the whole point was that up until driver training, he had trouble doing U-turns. But on the first day he had to go driving, he had to make a U-turn. And yeah, he did it. That was his greatest challenge of all time.
See, like, I love stuff like that, but there's no way I could ever pull off writing an essay like that. And I would try, but I feel like it's
because
important.
It's inauthentic.
Yeah, that's not how I am. So it's just like I couldn't pull something off like that.
That's the point.
Yeah. I remember online, I was like looking up example essays, and I found this girl who wrote this essay about a bra and what it means to her, and she got into Harvard for it. And I was like, how can you write an essay about a bra? Like
an undergarment.
Yes. And
okay,
I was like, how can you get into Harvard with an essay about that? And then I read the essay, and it was one of the most beautiful essays I've read in my life. Like the way she described it was just so incredible. And I was just like, wow. So it's just insane what people can write about and just the imagery that they can use to make it sound incredible.
Well, here's the other thing, y'all. We're talking about one part of, let's say, 100-part application. And then you're hearing online, this person with this essay got admitted. So is it because of that essay?
Yeah, I was honestly going to bring that up because I think online you go on these things and you're looking up like USC admissions or other things like that. And then you read like, oh, I am a like 6'3" woman, like blah, 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 that I grew up here.
Chance me.
Yeah, they give you literally every single statistic. And then they tell you like, sometimes it's they already got in or sometimes it's the chance stuff. And there's just like, I used to be like, oh yeah, I'm kind of like this girl, but you just can't do that at all.
You go on Reddit and there'd be this post and it'd be like, okay, well, I'm a Black male from Chicago and I did this, I did robotics and I did this. And it's like, chance me. Or I'd be like, okay, like insert school application essays. And I would read through the essays and be like, okay, how can I think about making an essay that sounds like that? And it would just be all these things to try to compare yourself and mock yourself up. And it's like, then I had to take a step back and kind of realize that I'm really not like any of these people, because I'm trying to find the little similarities because I want to get into that school, but it just never really panned out and worked well.
Do you all think it's kind of a continuum of how you were trained to do well in high school? Like there is a way to get an A in this class?
I'd say so. It's very structured because there's not a lot of leaning into there's more than one way to get the right answer in high school, which I'm glad in college because I can look at other people and be like, okay, well, we're doing different things. We're still getting this like a same result or the same success.
Yep.
So it just feels like they want to cookie cutter mold you. And then it's like, okay, you're going to college, which you can't fit the cookie cutter mold onto college, but they're making you do it.
Yeah, my school, I forgot what it was called, but we like would input the colleges we were into like a system. Naviance, yeah. And then it would like plot you versus everyone else at your school that had applied to that school and whether they got admitted or like waitlisted and stuff. And it was your ACT score and your GPA. Those are the only two things that they plot you against. And it was just like super, like, number one, not useful because those are like not even, I mean, there is no one important part of your application. And they gave me like a false sense of confidence or a false sense that I didn't have it just by looking at those plots.
That's the struggle right now is two things. One, you all have been trained to be highly successful in academic environments. And so as a result of it, you are. The problem is, Cameron, what you just went into is that it's a formulaic academic environment, which is exactly what college isn't. And our process for undergraduate admission, as are a lot of colleges and universities, and I will put a caveat on here that every college and university is different. And there is a good number of colleges and universities that it's very easy to actually create an X and Y axis and create plot points of exactly where you're going to get admitted and when you're not going to get admitted. And that is not what USC does. And we're not, if you want to be objective about it or quantitative, there are only 2 data points by which you can actually do that with, which would be a test score and a GPA. But I can very quickly kind of put holes in all of those. One is all of you had different GPA scales. You're all coming from different schools, different backgrounds. My favorite is there are certain schools in Texas with a 6.0 GPA. I was, did you have one like that, Kevin?
Yeah, AP classes are worth 6, honors are worth 5. So everyone takes honors class, and regular, which no one takes, are worth 4. So you can have a 5.0 and like not really challenge yourself.
Right. It's my favorite thing
Whoa.
when I meet a high school student say, I have a 5.5 GPA. I'm like, you have a what? How does that work? How does that work?
Yeah. I recently had to tell my brother to stop putting his GPA on his like his high school GPA on his resume, because he just finished his first year of college and he has like 4.0 unweighted, like blah blah blah
Sure.
weighted, and I'm like, Ryan,
Sure.
it doesn't mean anything. You should just take it out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what we get at here is that the ones that are doing all this, like you all and others that are like on Reddit, which by the way, best word of advice, don't go on Reddit. You're just gonna, your brain's gonna
Yes,
explode,
please.
guys. I go on it for entertainment. Like I go on it just to read. I'm like, well, that's a funny take on this. Because they're all wrong. And the only way you actually get it right is that if you are reading the whole thing and you understand, oh, everybody, similar to our conversation, everybody has all these opinions. They have no background on it. They just kind of think what they think. And your application is so filled with information that is 99% subjective, right? So Emily, to your point about like handicapping admission, what are your chances? You either feel one of 2 things: overly confident, which would be wrong, or, oh my God, I'm never going to get in, which is also wrong. And you shouldn't feel either of those things at any school. You should know chances of admission, which is just a publicly stated admission rate for every university.
Mhm.
And you should put that in your head, right? So USC around 10%, maybe a little bit under that. Other schools, and this is a point to mention that the majority of schools in the country have admission rates over 75%. Like the majority of colleges and universities admit 75, 80% of their students. And so working with your college counselor on finding a good range of schools, right? They always talk about reach schools, safety schools, whatever you want to get into. But if you do have a spectrum in there about like highly competitive rates of admission versus not so competitive rates of admission, and you kind of spread those things out in kind of a standard, distribution curve, then you should be good. Use an 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your applications are somewhere in here, 20% are on this side, 20% on that side. If you want to be mathematical about it, if you want to be purely engineering, not 80% here, 10% here, 10% here, excuse me, but that's the 80-20 rule. And you also, it added up to 140%, but 120%. But this idea is distribute your possibilities and see where you want to go. And if you want to increase ones because you like schools, that's where you should really be leaning into. Is it's a matching system. What do you like? What sounds interesting to you? In the application, there isn't that formula that would increase one's chances of admission, because that's usually the next level of questions, which is, okay, so how can I increase my chances, or how can I really make sure, because you're my number one school. I hear that all the time. And I'm sure you never tell more than one school that you're the number one school. Of course, I know you're only telling me that, and I'm very grateful for that. But this idea is just, hey man, just go for it. Like, and it's weird because with an engineering brain, you all are like, no, I don't take chances. I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I want to make sure that I've got this all figured out to a T. Do you feel like you all had a little more pressure on yourselves because you had that mathematical mind or that quantitative reasoning behind you?
For me personally, no, not at all. So like I definitely took the whole, like, I didn't even look at admission rates, like percentages. That just wasn't something that really clicked in my brain, because I'm like, this is all like not fake, because like it's a mathematical number, of course, but I just never really looked at it. And I was, when I applied to like reach, match, and safety schools, and like a couple of schools, because we had a requirement to apply to like 3 in each category. And I did that. People were like, why are you applying to schools? I'm like, hey, you just never know. You should just apply everywhere. So I didn't really take that, the whole like, oh, there's a lot of pressure. It's like, college is college, and you should, like, I only applied to schools that I legitimately would have gone to if it had come down to that. But yeah, I just kind of took it and just more of like a relaxed, like, hey, this is college. Like, I know I'll, get in somewhere. Like, I'm not going to not go to college, but I was just kind of, I tried to lay back a little bit. Of course, I wanted to get into top schools, but I was just like, well, we can see what happens. It doesn't have to be so planned out and fluid. I'm trying to do something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember my economics teacher in high school, like when I was actually taking economics younger than everyone, so his advice didn't really hit me until a year later. But
Hmm.
he was like, guys, don't stress too much about this college thing, because we were talking about marginal benefit and marginal utility and stuff in class. And he's like, you'll never know how much better it could have been at another school. Like, you'll
Yeah.
probably be happy, like, regardless of where you got into. I mean, the only way you'd know is if you transferred, and it's still, you wouldn't know what it would have been like.
That's the best part about this, is that there's this implied sense of quality of school, and that a better experience for each of you is there's a possibility to have a better experience at one school than another, and that is correlated to what you believe the ranking or reputation is of that school.
Mhm.
And that's just not at all true. Students need to find, Cameron, to your point, they need to follow what you did, which is, hey, do I like this school? Would I go there? Do I see myself doing well there and having a good time? And you kind of get away from, because you threw out this other thing where it's like you thought you were kind of like fighting the norm, which is like a top rated school. You threw that word out as if that's a objective truth. There's no such thing as a top rated school. Like, I'm going to one of the top schools. Like do you think all these people that are very successful in life that went to a quote unquote untop rated school are just like ashamed for the rest of their life? Like, I didn't go to a top rated school.
Yeah, I also think that a big point into that is this quote that my dad told me, that's like, the grass is always greener. And I'm definitely thinking about that when I think about what I want to do with my life. And I feel like it applies to college in the same way, in that you're always going to think that you kind of have this image in your head of what the school is going to be like before you actually get there. And I think that sometimes you actually have to try out those experiences and learn from them, and then know whether that's actually what you want or not.
Yeah, and I think with that, like, that kind of also comes to a point of like the another cliche of like, everything happens for a reason, sort of, because you go into the college application process expecting one thing and something else may happen. And sometimes once you get to some place, you'll, like, in the first little sort of like inconvenience happens, or like uphill battle, and you'll be like, man, I wish it would have been better somewhere else. And then you kind of think about that, and they're like, okay, yes, like, because those doubts happens, of course, and like, and they're inevitable. But as time goes on, you're like, yeah, this was way better. So I just feel like going through the process, just understand that, okay, if it didn't even work out the way you wanted it to in particular, yeah, sure, you would have liked it to happen, but now it's time to look forward to the positives about where else you're going and trying to make the best of that, instead of like living your life wondering what could have been. Live what you are right now, because there was a point in time where you wish you were going to any college, and now you're here.
Yeah. It's almost like you walk onto campus and then you have a bad day. You're like, see, I never should have come here.
Exactly.
I hate this place. This place sucks. And it's similar to like watching my daughter, like, she's going into first grade this year. She just found out who her teacher is, and my wife and I are like, and all the parents were talking yesterday with this like back to school event.
It's always so dramatic.
Oh, it's so dramatic. Oh my God. We have this back to school event where like you go to the school and it's outside, and like they have posted signs up. It's like you go to see where your kid got placed into school, and like, oh my God, is she with her friends? Is what's happening? Yeah. And some of the parents and I were talking afterwards. I'm like, you realize we're just projecting our own insecurities onto our kid, right? Like we're just remembering any day where we had a bad day, and because they don't care. Like they don't care unless we tell them to care. Like, oh, cool, you're in that class and you're with those friends. You don't have all 6 of your friends. You have 2 of your friends, and that's great. But it's this fascinating idea that like we're also worried about, like, oh my God, we got to make sure that she likes it. And like some people are like, oh, they're going to write the principal to switch the class. I'm like, why? Like, it's going to work out. Like, just get through it. It's going to be fine. Let it go.
Yeah. I mean, you always have to go through a couple not so awesome teachers.
Yeah.
And then you have some awesome teachers too. And I think like at USC, like genuinely, like I've had really positive experience. Like they're not all created equal, but I had some really negative experiences in elementary school, middle school, and high school. And I haven't had to deal with that.
With that, about having friends in the class, like, oh, you only have two of your friends, so 6 of your friends. There was not a soul from my school who went to USC at all. Maybe there was one person, I don't really know who they are. And people are like, oh, you should have went to school where you knew all your friends from high school. I'm like, I like the opposite, because you never know. Then I got a chance to meet everyone and
Yes.
see all of your
It-
faces instead of I would have just stuck with my little clique from high school.
Yeah, it pushes you out of your comfort zone. Because I had a similar experience. I had two other people that I barely knew from my high school that came with me. But I'm really glad that I ultimately pushed myself into an environment where I didn't know as many people, because I feel like I wouldn't have made all of these new friends and experiences that I have.
Mm-hmm.
I think that
Yeah.
also segues really well into something else I wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
Like, I was wondering how you guys came up with your list of colleges that you applied to. Because for me, like, I'm from a huge school in Colorado that has 5,000 students. And I knew 100% I did not want to go to a school in Colorado because I felt like I would just be my high school 2.0. Like, looking back on that now, I think that was kind of like a harsh decision and maybe not the smartest, but I was wondering how you guys came up with your list and how, like, Cameron, you decided to go out of state so far away from
And
home.
how many schools too?
Yeah, how many schools too?
So I actually kind of the opposite as you, Emily. I, grew up in California, and I wanted to stay in California for college just because I have always really loved this state, and I wasn't really looking to venture out. And I ended up applying to 7 schools. And looking back, I wish I did apply to more, because I feel like I was going to apply to more, but then I lost steam throughout the application process, and there was a little bit of senior burnout. And
Yep.
I kind of wish that I did push myself to apply to a couple more schools, but ultimately I am happy with where I ended up. And I mostly chose UCs, and I also did Cal Poly SLO, USC, and Stanford. And I was really happy with choosing schools that were in California, and I'm glad I was staying here. And those are mostly decisions that related to like weather, and I really love the weather here. And then also just more personal reasons, like wanting to be close to family and staying local. So those are some of my decisions.
Totally.
For me, it kind of felt a different thing. So like our school, we have a very robust like college coaching staff. It's like a public school, so it's very large, but we have a very robust program for it. So for example, like I was mandated to apply to one public in-state university in Illinois. So the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Pretty good school.
Right.
I didn't really mind going there.
Great school.
Yeah, I have
Great school.
plenty of friends there, like coworkers there as well. But then as far as like it came out, like I had just come from like a program at MIT. So of course they were like, oh, you should apply to the institutes. Like I applied there. And like I applied to like other places in the Midwest, like, Urbana, Purdue, like a couple other places. But I really was set on going to California. And I was like, oh, I went to the Bay one time and I loved it. So of course I applied to like the stock Bay schools. And then while I was out in the Bay, I came down to California and I toured USC for the first time. I was like, all right, I applied to USC, and I didn't go to the UCLA tour because they lured me to go to the USC, the Turby tour after my general tour. So I ditched UCLA for USC. So it was, I guess that told early on, and like I should have realized. But yeah, and I just like threw like a smorgasbord, because then we also like, it was very institutionalized. We had to apply to 2 safety schools, which doesn't work at a certain point because using Naviance, it's like safety school based on GP and SAT. But like at a certain point, like they're like, I guess everything is like a match or a safety. So it was really weird, but like it all fell down. So I applied to 9. I wish I would apply to a few more, but I ended up having to shift focus to applying to scholarships to fund school. And so like after like that early section, like December, I was like, all right, I can't apply to any more schools because I need to apply to pay for school. And it just kind of fell off, but I'm happy with my 9 that I applied to.
Yeah, I applied to like 20 or something. I definitely applied to a lot of schools.
20.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
I knew a kid at my school who applied to 40.
Wow. Yeah.
40.
I'm like getting ready to do
Oh my
my
God.
medical school applications, and they recommend to apply to 30. That's like the normal amount.
Oh man.
Jeez.
But yeah, I chose 20. I was really like, I worked really hard in high school. I mean, I think everyone here can say that as well. But for me, it was like, oh, you succeed. Like the stamp of approval, like you did good in high school, is like you got into an awesome high ranked college. So that was like what I wanted. I wanted that validation for everything I had done. So I applied to a lot of the Ivies, a lot of really competitive schools. And I also applied to like the big name state schools. And I didn't apply to any UCs, but the only reason I didn't apply was because I didn't want to do their application, which I think is really a stupid reason to not apply there. But yeah, and USC was kind of someone just was like, you should apply to USC, like it's pretty cool and they give scholarships. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds cool. I applied and I came to visit with my grandmother because she lives in Orange County. And I came to campus and I went to the Village, which if you guys haven't been, it's just like a really nice area on campus where like a lot of people live and there's shopping and stuff. And I was like, whoa, this school is so cool. Like I like would love to come here, but I'll probably be going somewhere else. And then that like, you know, people always talk about having a feeling about like knowing a school was right for you. And I never really believed in that. And I think that was my feeling that USC was right for me. But then I kind of ignored it. And it wasn't until later in the application process that like getting like the schools I was accepted to, I was like, yeah, I mean, USC was the only school that I felt so like right at. And I can't explain why, but it just felt really nice when I was on campus.
I think that too often one of the threads of this conversation is pressure from some sort of unknown source, whether that's yourself or others or Reddit or parents or whatever. Cause like, you know, like you had to get into a good school and you had to be able to show that off to everybody. And there's this thing in my head I always like cringe at, but I understand the purpose of it. I understand where it comes from, but I feel for certain students when high schools have their like college sweater day, like, oh, like you wear your college sweater where you're going. That implies that there are good choices and bad choices, and that there's certain people that are proud about it and there's certain people that aren't. And that just really gets me, because that's at the core of this whole thing of like all this pressure you're going to. And Cameron, you talked about, I had plans to apply to other schools, but I think I just had senior year burnout. I'm like, no, you had application and pressure burnout. Like it wasn't anything to do with senior year, man. It was just like more to the point. You wanted to get back to your senior year, right? It was this idea of like, what are you missing out on? And again, I come from kind of an idyllic place of like, don't stress, it's fine. And I get that that's weird for someone like me to say. But so much of this is who's putting the pressure on? Is it the parents? Is it the students themselves? Is it the students because they're engaged in so much information online where they feel like they're supposed to be some sort of magical thing that they're not supposed to be? What defines success out of high school? Is it the quote unquote tier of college? Is it the scholarship of the college? Is it staying home, going far away, whatever that's going to be? Everybody has these really kind of weird elements to it. And I think that if you start out with this idea of like, I'm going to go to a place that I'm going to enjoy, and then that should be maybe the only pressure, right? Like you want to enjoy your process and have it be either joyful or at least personal or fulfilling to you. But this process of application and going into senior year often starts way earlier, right? So this idea of like, you got to get good grades, you got to like get those A's because it's all for college, and you got to go into that. There was a story on CBS News over this weekend all about college pressures, and they were focusing on a high school in Mercer Island, Washington. And these students were talking about all this pressure, and the question is like, where's the pressure coming from? And no one seems to know. But I was trying to reduce it down, is that there is, to Cameron's point of like visiting campuses and where you decided to apply or how you're going to do that. Oftentimes, because everyone's focused on the end result, right, of this idea of where you're going to go, you shouldn't actually be asking yourself that question in the beginning. I try to break it down to 3 phases. Applying has the first phase, which is you're deciding where you're going to apply. And so this is the part where usually all the pressure starts to set in. But I really want you all to think of it as you hold all the leverage and you're deciding where you're shopping, you're window shopping, right? You're taking tours, you're enjoying this, you're seeing what's out there. And you're only further engaging with ones where you had positive or fulfilling experiences. And if you didn't, then don't, right? So there's something telling Cameron that he didn't want to go spend the time at UCLA for whatever reason that was. And so he didn't, and that was fine. UCLA is a great school and it deserves lots of applications. The students are very successful going to UCLA, but for some reason it didn't work out for him, and that's fine. And Emily, the same thing for you. The UC system, the application turned you off. What that really means is that the UC system, for your perspective, didn't make you want to go through that application. So you're just moving on, and that's fine, right? You decide where you're going to apply, and that's the first phase that goes all the way through. You hold all the power in that. So there shouldn't be any pressure because you decide where you apply. The second phase is the part where you have no control. And that's where it gets a little bit scary, because the second phase is where we all decide where you get admitted. And so you have to put in your applications and literally turn off your brain, which is impossible for everybody, right? This idea of like, I spent all this time thinking about college and now I have to stop thinking about college. Then you figure out where you get in. So if, let's say you applied to 12 schools, if you got into USC, typically those students got into 11 out of the 12 schools. So now you've got 11 schools, and we go back to our ranges, right, of safeties and matches and reaches, et cetera. And probably when you boil it all down to the 11 schools, you probably really only wanted to go to 3 of them, right? Out of those 11. And so now you've got a debate between 3 of the schools that you really wanted to go to, maybe 4. It just kind of depends, because you were similar to Cameron's process. Like, you had these that you had to apply to, you didn't really care about, you kind of threw them in, and then you got admitted. You're like, okay, so they're automatically at the bottom of the shelf. Now, the 3 schools you have to decide to, this is where you have phase 3. And phase 3 is actually where the pressure is. And there's no way to take that pressure off, because there actually is a deadline of May 1st. And you have to tell schools where you're going to attend by May 1st, the National Candidates Reply Deadline, or what students call SIR Day, which I still don't know what it stands for. But students use this term with me all the time. And that phase is where all the pressure's on, but I will remind students that the leverage is still all in the hands of the students. They choose where they go. And so if you break it down into 3 processes, you all were in charge of 2/3 of that entire process. You decided where you're going to apply. You decided where you're going to go. There's a little leverage point in the middle where we decide where you're going to get in, we being admission people in universities. But this is your process. And so I always tell students that are feeling pressure or stress, you're controlling this. You like something, you don't like something, you turn it on, you turn it off. It's really as simple as that. Now, granted, there's a lot, again, that's way more idyllic than everything that's going into, like, financial aid and families affording college. And that's a whole other conversation. But it's all about where you want to go and where you see yourself being successful. And you go to the place that speaks to you. And that's the hard part, is that sometimes it speaks to you and not necessarily your parents. And that's a really challenging dinner table conversation.
Yeah. I'd say, that part about it speaking to you and not other people, like I'm lucky that my family didn't really place a lot of overbearing pressure on where I wanted to go to college, but the outside influences, like school, like college administrators, even other members of family, just like the application, like I applied everywhere, that was cool. Getting into schools was fine, but making the decision was always weird. Just because, like, at least at the time, like I never been like, there's a lot of pressure to apply to in the beginning. Go to US News and World Reports. Okay, you want to go to engineering? All right, pick the top 10 engineering schools and submit off applications. That's a horrible thing. I didn't do that on purpose, because all of these schools didn't sound that nice to me. Like, I applied to a couple of them, but because I thought they were cool, but a lot of them didn't. But for deciding for it, it was deciding, like, they like looked at name, like, I guess, quote unquote name, but basically the Ivy Leagues. And it was like, oh, like, you don't want to go to an Ivy League school, but you got in, like, you should want to be Ivy League educated. Like, shouldn't you want to do this, that, and the third? But what I realized is that they'll say, okay, that's so beautiful, you got into Ivy League school, and you go there. But then what if you don't like that? They talk to you, they say congratulations for 5 minutes, and then you have to go somewhere for the next 4 years of your life where you don't want to go. And, like, nothing, there was anything wrong with the school, but, like, I would purposely pick the school that I liked more. I wouldn't pick something I liked less if you could get the better one, if that is there. So that was just always a weird thing, that you have to remember that the decision of where you want to go and live and spend your life for 4 years or more is ultimately yours, and not someone else's, who doesn't have to wake up there and go to school and, like, live there.
Yeah, I often bring up what Chris was talking about, like weather. That's a big deal.
Yeah, honestly.
It's a big draw.
People think it's like some sort of just, cosmetic thing. Like, no. Like, it's everything around you while you're living there. Do you like it? It's a big deal.
Exactly. Bringing up, I remember you talked about before, just briefly, like, walking around campus and then being mad and being like, oh, I don't want to go here. I feel like I feel the opposite, really. Whenever I walk around campus, it would calm me down, and it would kind of reinforce that I wanted to be at the school, which is what everybody should feel about the college that they go to. I feel like that's a good indicator of that you feel like you're in a place you belong, like a community that is right for you. And I feel like that everybody should focus more on that decision. I know that's easier said than done, because I was the same way in high school, and I was thinking a lot about the names and the statuses and all of that.
Did you guys ever walk in your campus tours, ever walk onto a campus and just automatically go, nope, not for me, and, like, want to walk right off?
Yeah, that happened to me once.
Yeah.
Me too.
Same.
Yeah, you don't need to say where it is, but
yeah, let's be anonymous.
Yeah, for me, it was like a homeless person was, like, going to the bathroom on the street while, like, the thing started. And it took this good school that, like, I actually think I would have also liked, like, totally off the book. I was like, I'm done.
My general rule of thumb for everybody is, if you don't like it in the first 5 minutes, you ain't going to like it for the next 4 years.
Hmm.
And so and people that can happen at USC. People walk into USC's campus and be like, nope. I'm like, hey, great. That's awesome. I'm not here to talk anybody into applying to USC. I want the right people to apply to USC that are going to like it, because ultimately then we can have these conversations. Like it occurred to me that this whole conversation is a very biased conversation. Like, I love my campus. I love walking across, and it calms me. It makes me feel like these cool things. I'm like, yeah, cool. Then this is working. Like, this is the right space. And I think I guess that's the main point to our audience, which is that's what you should be seeking, is this sense of like, yeah, I can see myself here. This is a killer place for me. And I want to explore more. I don't want to walk away.
Yeah.
Regardless of what someone else told me about this place before I got here.
Exactly.
For me, it was like when I met students, it wasn't really the atmosphere didn't really affect me, except for that one school. It was more like being on seeing a panel, and I'd see this student that was also pre-med, and she was studying engineering and also had a life outside of engineering and like played sports and stuff. That was like, I was like, wow, I could be friends with this girl. I could be this girl. I want to be her. So that was kind of how I kind of gravitated towards certain schools.
And there's so many different versions of that. Chris, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say something similar, that I feel like when you focus more on the actual feeling of the campus, you kind of eliminate some of the stress that you feel during the college application process. And I think that making it more of a feeling is just ultimately a better way to relieve that.
Absolutely. Well, I hate to cut off the conversation here, but I do need to run. And I'm really thankful, Cameron, Chris, for bringing this topic up and bringing it to the audience. And if there's other thoughts that come up kind of throughout the next couple of months, and you think of it, or you realize that there's so many other questions that are being asked from prospective students, let's do another one of these and talk a little bit more about the application process, because we definitely scratched the surface, but I hope that I think we got some really good themes in.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I think we should definitely incorporate this more.
For sure.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much. We'll see you guys a little bit later.
And we're back. Yeah, I really loved that episode. I was wondering, Paul, what you thought, like was there anything that we talked about that kind of surprised you? Because you've been doing this for so long.
I would love to say that something surprised me, but no. I think that I think what surprises me is how consistent every year is, and that each group, each incoming class, each group of high school students kind of assumes that their problems are unique. And I get that, and I don't want to minimize their challenges because I think it is a challenge, and every family, it is unique because from their perspective, it's the only time they're going through it, or maybe it's the first time they're going through it if they're the oldest. And in some ways, it is it's surprising how we have to kind of start over every year. Mm-hmm. And I always have to remind myself that when someone asks a question, even though it's the 1,000th time I've had that question, it is the first time they've asked that question. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's always a reminder of like, take a breath, exercise patience, exercise empathy with students and families that are going through this process. And ultimately, although questions may come in different formats, what I always really focus on is, regardless of what the question was, I want to get down to what's the and we've talked about this before, Emily, like what's the embedded concern? Like what is this family, what is the student actually worried about? Because they can ask a million different questions about different things, but at the core of that, there's a concern. So let's identify the concern and let's figure out how to walk students through that process, because answering the questions that are tertiary to it or kind of surrounding it or like tangential to the concern actually don't help address the concern. All they do is they help add to the possible stress that's building up around that concern, because every type of student tries to triangulate the answer of things, or they try to get information to triangulate some sort of solution to their concern. And let's just talk about the concern. Let's get down to it. So that's kind of my approach. Ultimately, I know that can be frustrating because I have really long answers, because I'm kind of like trying to dive through stuff and navigate through different areas and try to like help the family and student identify the concern itself. But ultimately, I think it's a really neat process. And for me, what I really hope happens, and I know that when I meet with students, over Zoom or in person, what I hope is that they kind of get a sense of decompression. They get a sense of like, oh, I know I have to give some bad news, like saying there's no way to do this, there's no right answer, but I hope that I can give them a little bit of like, let's get rid of all of that internet nonsense. Let's get rid of all that stress that you're having amongst your peers and what you've heard about this process and the stress you're putting on yourself because you're a successful student. And I hope that we can find students and families that, feel better about the process. And ultimately, we can do our best to project what the philosophy, what the vibe is, what the personalities are of our campus, because I think ultimately that's what we do well is, hey, we're just representatives of USC. And in that process, we can hopefully mimic what students go through on campus here and what they can hope to find. So I don't know, is that what you found, do you think? Or now that you've got years between you and the application process and this conversation and kind of what I've just explained as my approach, do you think that's do you think it's working? Do you think we're doing a good job of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that like the thing I got caught up a lot with the application process when I applied to college was, is this school like highly ranked? Is this school like, will people know this school? Will people see this school and be like, Emily is super smart or something? And so I didn't look enough at the vibe as much as I should have. And I remember coming to USC and I just really enjoyed like being here and the energy, but I was kind of like, well, the energy is not important. And so I'm glad I ended up choosing USC. Like, I feel so lucky that I like stumbled across this decision because I do not think I did it in the right way at all. And now it's interesting because I'm looking forward to medical school applications. And it's kind of a similar process. And it's like, well, how do you get like the energy from a medical school? Should I be going? Because I think I don't know, maybe I'm justifying how I think. Like, I think medical schools like rankings might matter a bit more for getting into residencies, but I don't know. So I just have to think about it a lot. And like a lot of the advice I think that was given in the episode, like I should take for my application process.
I think so. I view it as, I think that there are, okay. So, but without going too much into medical school, because it's a little bit out of my expertise, but I do think that there's some relatable content and some advice there that would be helpful. But first off, you can never tell a prospective engineering student vibe is important. Don't worry about those metrics. Because that if you were told that, you'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
You would never take that advice, even if it was given to you. So I learned a long time ago, you don't force feed that. However, you do address it. And then, and then at the end of the conversation, what I hope that we would have done is we would have given vibe, like they would have absorbed it without really knowing it. And so hopefully that's what happened to you, is that over time you're like,
oh yeah,
I'm being drawn here for what seems like really good reasons. So you can't force feed that to a highly analytical person. You just have to be like, yeah, totally.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, metrics, sure, let's talk about that, but let me tell you why some other stuff might be important, and then kind of like, backdoor the knowledge onto them. And at the end of the day, I think what you described yourself as like tripping into USC is actually how a lot of people do it. They only visit because it's on that list of ranked schools. Like, oh, we'll go check it out. We'll see what happens. And it's in LA and there's other schools, and we'll go see what happens. And I think that's the point. You're supposed to discover places along the way. And some people do that with USC and some people do that with other places. And that's how this process is supposed to work. They're not supposed to come to USC. They're supposed to find the right place for them. Now with med school, yes, you are going back into your old self. You're there. Oh no, this is where the debt is. And I would say, I have a feeling that you have not put bad medical schools on your list. And I think that I would go back to that idea of like, are rankings important? Maybe, but are they important at this level, like up here, right? Yeah. Does it matter that one is 12 and one is 8, you know, like does
Mhm.
that really matter? Like, or are you like, I'm sure you have tiers, and
Mhm.
just like with undergrad or going to colleges, there are first of all, with undergrad, I would actually throw a lot of that away. I mean, I think schools are schools, and wherever you're going to find community
Mhm.
and where you're going to be successful is a big deal. With medical schools, I have a feeling that you have like versions of this, and I would not obsess about those things. And I have a feeling that
Mhm.
I would use, for lack of a better term, I don't want to call it objective data, because no data is objective when it comes to schools or rankings, and even medical schools. There's a subjective element to it. Someone
Mhm.
along the way assigned value to something, and that's where they got that ranking number. So I wouldn't call it objective data. But if you're going to apply quantitative numbers to this from some other source, I would only use it as a way to create your list, right? So
Mhm.
you've created your list of what you're looking at or where you're applying to. And then once you've got it down to who you're applying to, then you start visiting, and then you go off of, fit or vibe or, philosophy, or more specifically, what you're really doing is you're kind of calculating in an anecdotal way how you believe you will be successful at that specific community. And I want you to keep using the word in your head, community, not so much school, because there's this weird parallel that you all make as students, that you think that
Mhm.
some sort of metric or ranking is equivalent to the amount of knowledge you will gain
Yeah.
or quality of knowledge you will gain, and that is not true. You're going to be
Mhm.
learning the same things. The real question is what you will be like. What is the process like? What is the environment like? What is the
Mhm.
approach like? What will you end up doing in that time period? And just trust your gut there. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. I guess that's good news, because that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So,
Great.
because medical schools, you apply to like 25 to 30 normally. And I think the big difference for me between college apps and medical school apps is I applied to schools I had no intention of going to for college. Like, I applied to them just because I felt like I needed to.
Yeah.
And so I felt like it was like, oh, well, if I get into this school, like I failed or something. And I think now it's like with medical school, every school on my list is a school I'd love to go to. So I
Good.
feel a lot more comfortable with the list.
Good. You're also a different person now. You've
Yeah.
grown. And I think that's a
Mhm.
big deal too, is recognize your own growth, and also recognize your different definition of comfort zone. Like, I know some people, when they
Mhm.
look at graduate schools, medical schools, whatever they're looking at, they say like, oh, I've done this is like one version of it. So don't take this as the example, but you can hopefully see that this is a version of it. Oh, I've done the California school. Maybe I'll go do the Midwest now, or maybe I'll go do like the
Mhm.
East Coast, just because I want to see and experience something different.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel.
Is that how you feel? Yeah. So
Yeah.
like that everybody feels that way. Like, or my point is, everybody feels versions of that. Like, oh, I'm definitely not going anywhere from the West Coast, or like, oh, I definitely want to get out of the West Coast. And some people just want to explore and do things. The main advice here is, all this said, whatever you do, don't choose a school. And you've already kind of said this, don't choose a school to apply to, don't choose a school to attend, just because you think the data is telling you to do so.
Mhm.
And that's the wrong way about it.
Yeah,
It's gonna be a
for
mix.
sure.
Yeah. But anyways, let's talk about your classes. It's the first week of classes. You're in classes. You talked about this in the beginning, and
Mhm.
it's just super cool being with human beings again.
Yeah, it's like so nice, like being with my friends and seeing people I hadn't seen in like a year and a half. I'm like running into like my freshman friends from McCarthy, like in the village and stuff.
Cool.
And I live off campus, but so many USC students live near me. Like on the way to class, I ran into like 5 people I knew, and we like all walked over together. So it's
Sweet.
kind of cool. I feel like I still like live like on the central campus. It's
Right.
been fun.
Well, it's funny, like when people talk about on campus, off campus at USC, they don't realize it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Like even you right then, you're like, well, now I live off campus. Like if we didn't clarify this, people would think like you live incredibly far from campus, but you're actually living
Yeah.
like what, the next block over from where you used to live.
I live a
Maybe
half
two.
mile from campus.
And so I always like to specify to guests, when students say they live off campus, they're usually living right next to it, because it's some sort of remarkable stat of like 90% or something of our undergrads all live within a half mile of campus.
Yeah.
It's a small radius, and it's a very tight knit community. When people say off campus, it's not the same as other universities.
And that actually totally reminded me, that was one of the things I thought about a lot with college, was I wanted to go to a school with a really tight knit community. And I was concerned. I was like, USC, they only live in the dorms for 2 years. Like, I don't
Oh my
wanna...
God. Yeah, that's the thing. That's what they're like, oh my
Yeah.
God, you only have on campus housing for 2 years. I'm like, dude, it
I was
doesn't
like, everyone's
matter.
gonna live by themselves. Like, what the heck? And this is like pretty much the same thing. So it worked out.
I always want to clarify that because everybody freaks out. Like, what do you mean only 2 years? I'm like, oh my God. Okay, so look, 1 year you live in that building, and then the next year you live in that building. One of them's owned by USC, one of them's not. That's the
Yeah.
difference.
And it's also like, I was like, they don't guarantee housing after your freshman year. And it's like, a lot of people don't want to live on campus after their freshman year. A lot of
Yeah.
people want to live in a house. And like, I have a garden now and I have a fire pit. Like, I have so much more stuff
That's
now that I
cool.
live off campus.
That's the thing. Yeah. When I always start to rectify, like change it to like university housing to non-university housing.
Yeah,
Because
that's a better way.
it's all the same spot. Because like when you look
Mhm.
at where everybody lives, if you drew that on a map, that is actually smaller than a lot of other actual campuses. Like that's a big deal. I think I'm fairly certain I've done this once where like just compared to UCLA, if you took our whole living area, which, you know, our campus is this little like nuclear core in the middle, right? And you take the housing area, if you put all of that, you can put that inside of UCLA's actual campus a couple times. It's a very small space, a very tight knit community, and everybody lives. And I often tell people that the amenities of non-university owned housing are sometimes better than university housing because there's a lot of variables there, and it's cheaper
Yeah.
too, cheaper for the square footage of what you get. So
Yeah, I enjoy it. I think there's a lot of freedoms living off campus. Although I kind of miss going to the dining hall a little bit. Like, this is my
Oh,
first year
that's
not
just
being
your
able
that's your
to.
reluctant to grow up.
Well, like, I don't like packing a lunch, and sometimes I only have like 20 minutes between classes. Like, it would be nice to like swipe into the dining hall. But when I had the dining plan, I was like, I don't want the dining plan. I just want to cook for myself. So I guess it's like the grass is always greener.
It's totally that. It's totally that. Like, you know, whoever has dining hall access is like, oh my God, I have to go to the dining hall again. I want to eat something different. And then like all of a sudden you're eating whatever you want. You're like, oh my God, I just want the reliability of going in and grabbing something. Can't have it both ways.
And my friends were like, why don't you like pay to get a meal on campus? And I'm like, that's different. Like, having dining dollars and like using your swipe is like okay, but like spending your own money, that's different, even though it's just
It's the same
digital
thing.
money. Yeah.
It's the same thing. Yeah. It's a mental block as far
Yes.
as like spending money. You know, Becky and our staff and I always talk about it because as staff, we don't have these luxuries. Like you pay your own money for food, whatever you want to do. And but we do fake it sometimes, or we fake ourselves out because we can attach our card to our payroll, and so they can do like a pre-payroll deduction. And so like if I take my ID card and I go buy lunch somewhere and I just use my ID card, it actually comes out of my next paycheck, right? So like I can pay like, oh, here's $10 for lunch, and then look, I didn't pay any money. Now granted, next paycheck is less, $10 less. And so Becky and I always call it fake money. Like, we're gonna use fake money.
Yeah,
It's the same
totally
idea.
fake money.
It's totally fake money, even though it is still the same money. And then my wife always has conversations with me, like back in pre-COVID, like, how often have you been eating lunch there? Because it looks like the paycheck's coming in a little bit light this time. Same thing's true for like the bookstore, and like that's a rough period.
I still need to use the cupcake ATM. I've never done that.
You've never used the cupcake ATM?
Well, I'm gluten free, so I don't know if
but
they have them.
They have the gluten-free red velvets.
They do? Okay.
Yeah, it's
Well, I'm
sprinkles.
gonna have to do that this week, and then I'll let you guys know how it was.
Yeah. So if those of you that don't know, an LA institution, it's much more popular now than ever before, but Sprinkles cupcakes are
yeah.
everywhere. It started in LA, and it's always like this, the cupcake revolution, like, basically started with Sprinkles, and it's grown really big. And they made news a long time ago that at one of their original locations in, I think, like Beverly Hills, like West LA, they put in a cupcake ATM, which was like 24/7 access to cupcakes. Soon thereafter, we installed a second cupcake ATM on the USC campus. And so if you're ever here, it's very famous. You can go up and use the cupcake ATM, and it's this live little robot that will pop out a fresh cupcake to you. And I think they restock it every week. And it just got restocked for the first time last week, I think.
Oh, cool.
So they're back up and running, and gluten-free. The gluten-free red velvets are delicious at Sprinkles, which I'm sure you've had at some point, maybe.
Yeah, I have had them. I just didn't know they had gluten-free ones at the ATM version as well.
They should. I mean, their stock is always, whatever's available, but it is one of the options. So you should check it out.
Yeah, maybe we should do a episode with all the seniors about like bucket list things to do this year.
Put it down. Bucket list, LA bucket list items.
Yeah,
LA bucket list
sprinkle
items.
ATM, like jumping in all the fountains.
No, things that are allowed.
Well, I mean, jumping in the fountains is allowed at certain times of the year. It's tolerated.
We're gonna do things that are allowed, and so that's the big thing. So that's the second time you brought this up, and I have to cut it off.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm really excited about it, but I would never do it because it's not allowed.
Right, exactly. Yes, we are not promoting any things that are not allowed. And I'll add to the LA bucket list, because I did last week. I did the goat yoga, and
oh yeah, how was it?
I feel like it was totally an LA bucket list item. I even said, like, it's one of those things where it's like, tell me you live in LA without telling me you live in LA. It's like,
oh yeah.
But it was interesting. I would, first of all, it was fun. It was great. I would recommend it. Emphasis on goat, not so much on yoga, which I think if it was any other previous version of me, I'd be fine. But now I'm like into yoga. And so I was like, why aren't we like doing some serious stuff here? Come on, people. Like, this is ridiculous. Because it like starts with like any traditional like yoga practice. Like all of a sudden she starts and you start like, you start reaching, you put your hands together, maybe start stretching, you start doing some other things. And then all of a sudden the goats run out. And the goats run out, and like this particular place had like animal crackers, and they gave you animal crackers that you broke up into little pieces. And she said, hide it under your mat so that they don't find them. And they're basically just scavengers looking for crackers. So they're running up to you, and they like want the crackers. They know they're there for the crackers, the animal crackers. And it's like, okay, get away from me. Like I'm doing my yoga, get out of here. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, let's get onto tabletop. And then all of a sudden they just start like putting crackers on your back, and the goats jump up there, or they pick the goats up and put them up there. And it's basically just a little bit of yoga and then pose with a goat. And so there's like 3 or 4 different poses of like, let's get into tree and hold the goat. Let's get it on the tabletop, get hold the goat. Let's do back bend wheel, like do that. So I posted a picture.
Oh my gosh, in wheel?
Yeah, so I did that. I posted a picture on Twitter of me in wheel, and the goat is on my stomach.
Whoa, that is so cool.
So it was interesting. Now the caveat there is the side conversation of my family was, what if they go to the bathroom while they're doing this? Because rumor has it that may happen. Now I'll tell you right now, it didn't happen. But I'm in wheel. I can't see anything, and there's a goat on me, and all of a sudden I can feel things hitting my face, like dropping onto my face. Like it's just like it's just kind of going. And I'm like, oh, what is that? So I basically have to like get out and like roll over, like, so I don't like hurt the goat and like get the goat down. So I have this weird thing. I'm like, what was, and my family's laughing. I said, oh man, did what happened there? The cracker was falling on your face because it was going down your chest, because it wasn't like a flat surface. It was just kind of like rolling down, because I'm thinking the goat is going to the bathroom on me. So I have a panic attack in the middle of this whole thing, and it's not what happened. But
I'm surprised you retained composure to like let the goat off safely. I would have just like been like, screw the goat, like get me out of this.
I don't know. It's a weird thing. Like I feel like if I did anything, every time the goat was near me, if I felt like if it was any sudden movement, I felt like I would get hurt. If that made any sense, like, because the hooves are kind of hard. Yeah, they're animals. The hooves are kind of hard. Like it doesn't hurt, but like you could feel them. And so I'm like, I don't want to get like kicked in the face on the way down. So you have this weird feeling of like, how do I get out of this? But I put a picture up on my Twitter account, so you can check that out.
Oh, awesome.
And then you can judge my form. I don't think it's very good, but I think I did okay.
It's okay. I don't do yoga anymore, so I can't say anything about it.
Okay. Well, if you ever want to do it, I'll give a shout out to the people that do this. It's the Cabra Farmhouse, Cabra. They're in Ventura. So it's a little bit of a drive from LA. I'm sure there's other places, but they do cool stuff because it's a woman, it's her house, it's a farmhouse, and she has a ton of goats. And it's a cool experience. You're basically just doing it on her driveway. And
nice.
And then they also make soaps from the goat milk and some lotions and stuff like that. And then they can sell that to you on the way out. So a little booming enterprise in this little woman's farmhouse and her goats.
That's actually like my goal. That's super cool.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, then you have to go. Cabra Farmhouse, Cabra.
Be an engineer with a goat farm.
Then I'll have a great time and let me know how it goes because I'm so not into it.
Oh
my wife and my
gosh.
daughter loved it. I'm like, great, we'll visit. I'm not. They're like, well, I want goats. I'm like, nope, no interest.
That's pretty cool though.
Anyway,
Anything else new with you?
That's basically it. 3 weeks talking about goat yoga. We teased it 2 weeks ago. We talked about it last week, and then I give the detail now. I feel like I've talked about goat yoga more than anything else.
We're like a goat podcast.
Yeah, welcome to the Goat Yoga Podcast. This is all we talk about here. No, nothing's new. I mean, if you're a prospective student, we still got our virtual sessions, and I encourage you to check those out. There might be an announcement coming next week about some other events happening, some in-person events, but not on campus. And so I'm going to tease that and leave that there because there's still a lot of stuff kind of in the works. But when we have an announcement, I will let you know, and that might be next week. But also just stay tuned to our website. We are also launching or just launched your guys' brand new student live chat session. So the live chats are every other Sunday. You can check out viterbi.usc.edu/events. I'm sorry, /visit. I'm messing up the URLs. Do this one. This one's easier. viterbi.live/events. viterbi.live/events. Check out every way to engage with us. Go to student events. And then we're going to be launching faculty-led events as well for each of the academic departments. So I think we've talked long enough. That's a long outro. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
Sorry. We like to talk. All right. We'll get out of the way. Thank you. We'll see you next week, everybody. Bye.
See you guys.